5个小时，每次上2.5个小时新下来。
好了，
那不需要我了。
我说你
等一下，这是线下的，我要到这里来。
对，是吧？就2.5个小时，4次把它结束掉。
OK。
啊，开播了！
哎呀，这是声音是开着的。
好 ，No worries.
Okay, sorry, let's start again. Welcome everyone to this evening's class. My name is William. Today I've been asked to give a quick speech or presentation just talking about how to start like a casual conversation, how to have a chat with someone who's a stranger. And the reason I've been asked to talk about this is because I have a lot of students as an English teacher, and one of the things people tell me is that they're always a little bit shy, a little bit worried about talking to native speakers because they think their English level isn't good enough. All right. So tonight, hopefully, I can give you guys a little bit of confidence and give you some strategies in terms of how to talk to people. And I can also share a couple of stories. So it's going to be just a nice casual talk, and hopefully you can pick up some useful tips. Okay, I want to start off with a quick little story. So this was something that happened when I was talking with one of my students, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. This was a student who was learning IELTS. And we finished a class, and he said to me, "Thank you very much. I need to go and attend another web class now." So I was very interested, and I was asking, "Oh, cool. What else are you studying?" Right? And that student said to me, "I'm taking a class on dating." And I was very interested because that's the first time I've heard of a class like that. So I asked, "Okay, what kind of class is that?" And then he said, "Oh, it's a very good class. What happens is you connect onto Zoom or something like that, and then the teacher will teach you lots of tips about how to ask girls out and things like that." Right. So I was very interested. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And what kind of tips do they give you? So he showed me like a very short video, 15-minute like sample video for all these pickup tips. And I watched through it, and I remember it was quite interesting. And it went something like this. So they said, right, if you want to be good at talking to ladies and things like that, you need to go through these steps. I've got a guaranteed way for you to be super appealing and super attractive to many women. And he said, okay, step number 1, make sure you stand very close up to them and put one arm out right next to them like that. Okay, so basically something along these lines. And then he said, next, I'll give you a couple of magic conversational tips that you can follow, right, to get into a really interesting conversation. And those tips went something like this. Number 1, ask them their name. And then after they tell you their name, every single time you speak to them, put their name in the sentence in the first couple of words. Next, start some casual talk, like what are your hobbies? What would you like to do on the weekend? And things like that. And finally, finish off with the most interesting question of all, which is, what's your star sign? Right? Are you a Cancer? Are you an Aquarius? Are you a Pisces? Or something like that. Apparently, that is an amazing conversation starter. So I remember watching this video, and I thought to myself, well, I don't know how effective this is going to be for finding a girlfriend or something like that, but there was actually a lot of good information in that particular video. A lot of these general ideas that's been shown here are actually some of the most simple tips that you can pick up for how to start a conversation. What you'll find is that the hardest part about talking to someone new, talking to a stranger, is you're just not very sure how to begin the conversation. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the way you should kind of present yourself, right, and ways that you can kind of build up your own confidence if you want to speak to someone new. And I should just very quickly say, you should never be scared to talk to a native speaker. Native speakers are not really any different from any other people you talk to. Okay, everyone you talk to is nervous. Everyone is anxious, right? They're just as nervous talking to you as you are talking to them. All right, so let's get into this. And remember, this method was told to me as being 100% effective. So tonight we're going to have a little look at just how effective it actually is. Okay, let's start with the most basic thing. We'll come back to this photo here, and let's start by talking about this thing called body language, right? Whenever you talk to someone, you should already know that confidence is one of the most important things that you're supposed to project, right? It doesn't matter how you feel inside, if you're nervous or anxious, on the outside, you want to be very confident. That way, the other person talking to you can feel very comfortable. If you're acting very nervous, if you're acting very uncomfortable, that makes the other person uncomfortable as well. So if you've had a bad conversation with people, a lot of the times it's to do with your own posture and the way that you're presenting yourself. Now, if we look at this photo here, I'm not 100% sure that this is the best way to engage someone necessarily. right? If you have your arm out next to them, you're kind of intruding on their personal space, right? Some people like it, perhaps, but I would say most people would feel kind of uncomfortable like that. A man being slightly taller, looking down on someone, gives you a bit of a position of power, which again, may be good in some situations, but mostly seems a little bit disrespectful. But there are definitely some good things, right? There's the eye contact, there's that kind of close intensity. These are all things that can definitely work out for you during a speech. One of the things that my teachers taught me when I was young, when they taught us public speaking, they always said, stand up straight with your shoulders back. Okay, and what this means is this is the proper stance to show your confidence, which is you want to make sure you have a straight posture, and putting your shoulders back shows your confidence. If your chest is facing outwards, right, that shows that you're ready to engage someone. A lot of people who I talk to start off like this, right? When you're in this kind of posture, what it tells people is that you're feeling very nervous and you're feeling very defensive, like you don't actually want to engage them. So that kind of posture, right, a lot of your intention is communicated through the way that you sit or the way that you stand. The next thing, of course, is eye contact, right? A lot of people think that eye contact is all about respect, right? They think if I'm looking at you, that means I'm interested in what you're talking about. That means I respect you as a person. And that definitely is true, right? But one of the even more important things about eye contact is that you always want to look at whoever you're speaking to so you can see their reactions, right? Remember that the other person also has body language. They may be nervous, they may be anxious. Depending on what they're showing you, right, you can react to it. For example, if the other person is looking at the ceiling when you're talking, that's usually an indication that whatever you're saying is a little bit boring or they're not very engaged in it. That's when you might decide to change the topic, right? If they're looking around side to side, it usually means that they're looking for a way out. In that case, you might just say, goodbye, thank you very much for your time, right? The body language of another person is actually one of the key features of being able to speak well. So that comes with the confidence kind of thing. Always look at the other person, right, and try to react to the way that they're sitting. And of course, talk with a bit of energy. Generally speaking, you want to bring a lot of positive energy to your speech. Even though I'm sure you've had situations where you've heard people who like to talk a lot, they love to complain. Generally speaking, people will always respond better if you have a lot of really positive energy when you're talking about things. And what I mean is it doesn't really matter what you're talking about, right? Always kind of have that bright, cheerful tone. Have a big smile on your face. That way, it doesn't even matter if you make mistakes. People will have a bit of a positive impression on you. Okay, so those are some of the most basic kind of techniques that you can use to start a conversation off in a nice, comfortable space. And of course, the last thing is, and this one is a bit of an interesting one, if you like following psychology, one of the things that we found is that copying another person's posture and movements is a great way for you to connect with them on a subconscious level. Okay, what I'm talking about here is literally when you're sitting down, try to sit in exactly the same way as the other person. If they're crossing their legs, you cross your legs, right? If they've got arms behind their back in a very relaxed position, you do exactly the same thing. Now, why do we do that? Well, it's actually not a secret. The answer is because everybody is more comfortable around people who are similar to them. And when you copy the other person, what you're doing is you're signaling that we are the same in some way, right? Like we're both Chinese, or we're both very relaxed people, or something like that. And over time, subconsciously, they start becoming more and more attached to you, more and more open towards you. This is something which a lot of people, kind of very good public speakers, very good social people will automatically do. And you can run this experiment with your friends as well. Next time you're in your friends group, right, just choose a random person and basically copy every single thing they do in terms of motion. Don't make it too obvious, right? If you copy them, you're going to see that after a while, the two of you will start mirroring each other. And then you can take the lead. You can, for example, grab a cup and take a drink, and you'll see that the other person does the same thing. Normally it takes less than 10 minutes to get to that particular stage, and it's a great way to help people feel a bit more comfortable. So overall, just as a quick summary, step 1 is to have good, positive, strong body language, right? That way people are happier to talk to you in general. Now, when it comes to talking itself, there's a lot of different skills that you can bring to the table, right? Tonight, I'm going to go over some of the most basic language skills, mostly, that you can think about if you want to start a conversation. So, usually a conversation starts with a greeting, something like, "Hey there," right? This greeting is kind of a very casual thing. Now, this obviously depends on your situation. If you're going into a business interview, you'll be shaking your hands and doing like the formal greeting. But the main purpose of the greeting is mostly just politeness, just saying hello, and telling people what your name is if the person's a stranger. That's usually the first port of call. Right. If a person is equally polite and willing to talk, they're going to offer their name as well. So it doesn't really matter too much what you say here, right? Here's some examples of very common Australian style greetings. "Hi there, how you doing? What's up?" These types of things. But eventually you're trying to get to the point where you say something like, "Hi, my name's William," right? And greet them. This is when most people will respond with, "Oh, I'm Peter," or "I'm Frank," or something like that. "Nice to meet you." Right. So now you've got the report started. That's the beginning of your conversation. Now, which one you choose, which greeting you actually go with, doesn't really matter. You can go with whichever one you want. Right. They're all pretty much exactly the same. Next, you're going to get into your first conversation starter. So now, conversation starters are basically things where you're basically moving from one topic to another to see if something catches. It's a little bit like fishing. So in the example that I was talking about earlier with the dating, their conversation starter was things like, "What did you do on the weekend?" or "What's your star sign?" Things that they think have a high probability of getting people interested in the conversation, getting people ready to start talking. But really what you're doing is you're trying to fish for an interesting topic that both of you can talk about. Right. So normally you do start off with some very, very basic stuff like how's your day going? Right. Are you enjoying this particular meeting or party or whatever it is? And stuff like that. And you shouldn't expect a lot of long answers right at the beginning of the conversation. Right. If you're a stranger, they're obviously going to be a little bit nervous talking to you. Right. But the most important thing when it comes to starting a conversation is that you always want to be the one starting it. You want to take the initiative. Right. To understand what this is about, every conversation has a leader and a follower. So a person who's leading and directing the conversation and a person who's just responding to that particular leader. It's always better for you to be the leader of the conversation because that way you can be the one deciding what kind of topics you want to talk about. Right. Especially when you're in a situation, if your English is not really that good, your vocabulary is limited, and the things that you feel comfortable talking about may be a little bit limited, right? You want to make sure that the conversation stays inside your comfort zone, inside your area of knowledge about, the things that you want to discuss, right? So how exactly do you take the lead in the conversation? It's super easy. All you need to do is ask the first question, right? Because remember that a regular conversation, a give or take, involves mostly one person asking a question and a person responding and giving an answer. The person who asks the question is the person who's directing the conversation, the person who's in control. While at the same time, the person who's answering the question is the person who's doing 90% of the work. Answers are usually more detailed and longer than questions, right? So even though the answer is doing most of the work, then they're not actually controlling the direction. So as long as you're the person, you're the questioner, right, you can generally kind of ask a simple question and then sit back and relax and listen to the other person talk. A lot of pressure off your shoulders. So all you need to do is just ask a casual sounding question. And if you're not very familiar with things like that, you always have the opportunity to just prepare your conversation points beforehand, right? So what you should think of yourself as is similar to a TV talk show host. Okay, so if you've ever watched like an American style talk show like this one, The Late Show, right, you've got the host over here. He's the guy asking the questions, but the celebrity, his guest, is the one who's answering most of the questions. And what they're going to do is this kind of exchange where he continues asking without revealing very much about his own life, right? And he's going to be doing the majority of the talking over here. In this kind of situation, you want to chain one question into another. This is what we call the follow-up question. Right, your goals are to make both of you nice and comfortable, right? You want to build trust, because if a person doesn't feel comfortable and doesn't trust you, they won't really start opening up and talking, okay? And you want to slowly find some topics or some shared interests which both of you are actually interested in, right? The truth is that people love to talk about themselves. Right, I'm sure you've met those friends before where once they start talking, it's all about me, I, all the stuff that's happening in my life. Most people like to talk about themselves. They just need to get comfortable with you first. And so this is where you ask a series of general follow-up questions, show that you're very interested in whatever they're talking about, and eventually they're just going to start going by themselves. They're just going to start running their mouth, and you can sit back and relax. Okay, so what you want to do, right, and this is something you can start preparing tonight, is you can think the next time I meet a stranger, I need an attack plan, right? I need some very simple general topics that I can talk about with everyone and that I can basically start practicing straight away, right? And you want to use the types of things that you already know. The more you know about your target, the more accurate your questioning can actually be, right? So I'll just give you a very simple example. Right, let's say I'm at a friend's party, and maybe this is a big party with a lot of new strangers who I've never met before. So I sit down and I want to speak to a stranger. Well, you have to ask yourself, what do you know about this person? Right, what can you use as a bit of a conversation starter to kind of guide you with this? Well, one thing that I do know is that he's at the same party as me and that somebody has invited him. Right, that's very obvious. That's common sense. So what kinds of questions can I ask? Obviously, I can ask him, are you enjoying the party? That's just a nice, comfortable, random question, right? No one's going to think twice about that. And then you can ask something like, who invited you to the party? Who's your friend here? If you guys know the same person, suddenly you've got something to talk about, right? So that's an example of a very simple attack plan, something that you can discuss basically in any type of party situation, right? And then start asking follow-up questions, right? This is a skill by itself. So a follow-up question is when they give you an answer, ask another question that directly links to that particular answer. So I've just quickly drafted up a simple script, something that you might see in a regular party type situation, right? So scene, some guy's party. So this is where I want to start the conversation and I want to lead it. So I might say something like, hi, I'm William, right? And they might respond with, hey, my name's Peter. And I'll be like, great party, huh? Yeah. So who do you know here, right? So who's your friend? Who invited you, right? This is the start of my line of questioning. And this is a very, very standard type of question. People expect to be asked that kind of thing. And he might respond with someone like, oh, I'm with Sam. And then I'll be like, ah, cool, Sam, right. So how do you guys know each other, right? So this is where you can see I'm taking his idea of Sam and then I'm extending it, right? So I'm asking another follow-up question. That means I'm not giving him a chance to change the topic or to run away, right? We're going to continue the conversation. So if we keep going, it says something like, oh, we used to go to the same school. Really? Which school did you guys go to? Oh, we went to UNSW. Then I might be like, is that the one down in Kensington? And he'll be like, yeah, that's the one. So how long have you guys known each other for? And at some point, your goal is to get to this last point here, where the other person starts to go into a bit of an extended response, right? So I'll say something like, oh, probably about 2 years. I was doing engineering there and we were in the same physics class, or something like that. So when they start giving you more details about their own life and things like that, that means that you've basically succeeded in the conversation, okay? If you just keep talking to someone, eventually they're going to start opening up to you, and then that's when you can just sit back and occasionally ask another question while they start doing most of the talking, Right, if you are a little bit new to English, this is the best way for you to actually learn English, if anything, but at the same time, just get into conversations with people, right? Just start by asking a bunch of pretty relaxed and simple questions, right? But always make sure you've got a nice positive energy, so it seems that like you're really genuinely interested in whatever they're saying. Good. Right, now I'll give you guys another simple example. This is something that I talked to one of my students about just recently. We're talking about Uber. So if you don't know, Uber is kind of like a taxi app, right? Somebody comes up to your doorstep and they'll drive you to a destination. And you know, your Uber driver is normally a complete stranger, right? Now I'm a bit lazy, so sometimes to get to work in the city, I take an Uber. It's about a half-hour car trip. And what I find is if I'm like just texting on my phone and he's driving, it's a bit of an awkward atmosphere, right? Two people just sitting there completely silent. So me personally, I like to have a bit of a conversation, right? But how do I start the conversation? Right, so I get into the Uber and they'll ask me, "Hi, are you William?" And I'll be like, "Yes, yes, how are you today?" Right, that's the beginning, that's my greeting. How do I get into a conversation with an Uber driver? Well, it's the same kind of thing. My first question is, what do I know about this Uber driver? Right, well, number one, I know what his job is. He's driving an Uber. Right, and number two, I know he's working right now. That's all the information I need to begin a really good conversation with a person. Right, so I'll give you a moment. Just think about this. If you got into a taxi or an Uber, right, and you sat down next to the driver, how would you open the conversation? Have a think about it for a moment. So I'm going to tell you my strategy. Okay. The first thing I do is I ask something like, "So, how's your day been going? Have you been working for a long time?" Right? Because I know they're in the middle of work. And most people don't mind having a bit of a chat. And they'll usually say something, right? They'll say something like, "Oh, no, I just started." Or I'll be like, "Oh, yeah, I started at 9 o'clock in the morning," or something like that. Right? Now, depending on what they say, I'll say a bit of a follow-up comment. Right? So if they say, "I just started," like I just started my shift, well then I might say something like, "Oh, cool, does that mean, so do you live somewhere around here?" Right? Then I've got a conversation that's kind of going towards where they live, right? What areas they're driving towards and stuff like that. Right? If they say, "Oh, I've been going for a few hours now," I'll be like, "Oh man, you started pretty early then." Right? "How much longer do you have to go?" Right? So you can see how depending on their answer, I might go in different directions, right? How much longer do you have in your shift? Where are you going after you drop me off? All these types of questions, right? And then, because I know a little bit about car driving, right, I can just ask some random questions which I'm interested in. Like, for example, right, "How far have you driven today?" Right? Maybe I'll ask, "Do you ever get some like really annoying customers? Have you ever picked up someone on Friday night who's like really drunk and they threw up in your car," and stuff like that. When you ask questions like that, right, you can be almost guaranteed that every driver probably has a few stories that they can talk about, and boom, you've got a nice easy conversation started. Okay, so even with strangers, all you need is just a tiny bit of information about them for you to start asking the questions, and then you just sit back and listen to whatever they want to say. Right, and of course, right, this will improve your listening as well. The more native speakers you can talk to, the better your English is going to become. Now, one thing you do always have to be wary of is this idea of reciprocation. Every time you ask somebody a question, right, there's always a chance they're going to flip it right back at you and ask the "how about you" question, right? So if I ask them, "So whereabouts in Sydney do you live?" Right, and they say, "Oh yeah, I live up at Bankstown," or something like that, they might immediately respond with, "How about you? Where do you live?" Right? So it's generally a good idea to try to choose topics that you can talk about as well. Right? Try to choose things where, you know, if I'm talking about their job, I'm going to be very aware that they might ask me about my job as well. It's always good to prepare a couple of topics that you can talk about, nice, simple, straightforward ones that come up normally when you talk to strangers or when you're introducing yourself, right? So just remember, every conversation is a two-way street, right? One thing I like to do is if they flip a conversation on me, if I'm feeling a little bit lazy, right, I'm going to look for an opportunity where I can just flip around again and ask them another question. Okay, make it seem natural, of course, don't force it. Right, you should always have a little bit of what we call conversation ammo in your pocket. So basically things you can talk about in case they're the ones questioning you. But you don't want to let them question you for too long, because the worst thing that can happen is if they ask you a question which you don't really know how to answer, and you end up having a big, long, awkward pause. So the faster you take control of the situation, the less likely that's going to happen. So here are some of the things that we normally talk about very often. So I guess this is my version of the pickup line topics. So work is probably the number one thing, right? When you meet a stranger, it's always easy to talk or complain about work. That's super easy. People you know, right? If there's any kind of people who you both know, that's usually an easy topic to get onto. Where you live in Sydney is kind of boring, but obviously that's something you can talk about, and of course just your local area in general. Food and restaurants, everyone loves food, no problems. Or you can of course talk about your family as well. Yeah, so these types of things are common topics which generally everybody is happy to share a little bit about. Yeah. Outside of that though, right, if they mention something that you just happen to enjoy, that's an easy way to get into it, right? So for example, if you're just talking and they randomly mention some kind of sports like NBA or basketball, feel free to just jump on that topic and just ask, oh, do you watch a lot of that? Who's your favorite players? Who's your favorite teams? And stuff like that. You might find out that you have an easy shared topic with them, right? So basically spend most of your time asking questions and listening to them, right? You want to listen to find out more details. The more you know about the person you're speaking to, the easier it is to find things to talk about in general. All right. Now, of course, when we're talking about conversations, right, there's a lot of individual techniques that you might consider, things that make you better as a conversationalist. Right. So this first idea is this idea of inclusive language. So when you talk about things, right, you want to try to include other people in the conversation, right? One of the things I tell people is that you don't want to say the word I too much, right? You remember how I told you guys earlier that everyone loves to listen to themselves talk. Everyone loves to talk about their own life. One of the things that gets really boring very quickly is if you meet a person who's just talking about themselves all day. I think this, I love that, I went to this place, I went to that place, right? The problem with this is that if you're only talking about yourself, then you might as well just be talking to yourself as well without that kind of interaction. It's almost like there's a wall between you and everybody else, right? So generally, if you want to engage people more and to give them a positive type of reaction to you, you want to make sure that you're including everybody in the conversation. So this is where you can simply substitute the word I with a we in the conversation, right? So, for example, right, instead of saying, I think this, I might say, we all think this, right? You know what I mean? Right? I try to include everyone in the conversation. Even when I'm giving you guys a speech tonight, right, I try to use inclusive language. Every now and then, I'm going to sneak in a very quick question like, you know what I mean? Right? Just to kind of get you guys to respond a little bit. It's a very common language technique, but it makes your speech a lot more interesting. Right? So maybe I'm talking about my work, right? And I might say something like, oh, my work is so tough, it's so tiring, and my boss, he's always bothering me. You know what I mean? Right? Of course they know what you mean. But the point is, if I say something like that, it feels like I'm trying to bring them into the conversation. It feels like I'm asking, how about your boss? Right? Does he have that same kind of problem? Do you experience the same issues as I do, right? And it gets them thinking, and maybe they will just voluntarily say, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, right? So try using that kind of thing. Try to address people directly, right? Ask people things like, what do you think? Or what would you do in this kind of situation? And stuff like that, right? Ask people for advice. That makes you sound like you're being very personal, right? So in other words, your goal is to try to get them to respond to you as much as possible, right? Now, if you're a little bit higher level, right, you can actually bait them into asking questions as well. So once you get a little bit higher level and you feel a little bit more confident in your speech, this is where you can start tricking other people into asking you questions, right, where you deliberately leave out information. So for example, one of the very simple tricks that I teach people is, imagine if I want to get someone kind of really engaged and interested in what I'm saying. I'm going to say, hey, guess what? You know what? Last night, the craziest thing happened to me. Crazy. Now, if I said something like that, what's the first thing in your mind? What's the first thing you think about? You're probably all thinking, whoa, something crazy happened. What happened, right? They're going to ask you what happened if you don't immediately say it. This is how you include someone else in your conversation again, right? You get them to start asking you questions. You get them to start actually having an interaction with you. Okay, so you want to look at different strategies for getting people involved. The second thing, another very good strategy that you can use, and one that's very, very commonly used in dating and picking up people, is to give people choices, right? To give people questions that make them think, that seem kind of fun. So for example, if you're at a restaurant with a stranger, what can you say? You might say something like, what do you think I should get? Do you think the beef looks better or the chicken? That's an example of a choice, right? Because whenever you ask somebody about a choice, they always have an option to give their opinion, right? And again, this can reveal information about them, and it makes them feel like you're very interested in what they're talking about, right? You can ask random questions, like, for example, if you're at a party, right, what would you rather do, right? Would you rather be the one hosting the party, or would you rather go to someone else's party? That might be an interesting question for you to consider, right? If you are going somewhere, like if you're on a trip with someone, you might ask them, should we drive there or should we walk? Right? These are, again, right, these are very simple questions which people are asking all the time, right? And that makes someone feel valued. And this is where, if they make a choice, you can always ask them, why do you say that? What's the reason, right? What's your opinion on this particular thing? And that's when you can get them started with the conversation as well, right? So if you guys are doing some kind of activity together, look for opportunities to give people choices. Another very easy way to get a conversation started. A third way, of course, is storytelling, right? Storytelling is a bit of an art, really. You can take a very, very simple story and make it extremely entertaining, right? Stories are usually things that happen to you, right? Of course, you can make up stories, but in general, it's usually better for you to tell stories that actually happen to you, or stories that you heard other people tell, right? This kind of he said, she said type of dynamic. People like listening to stories in general. They like to kind of sit back and relax a little bit. Now, storytelling, right, is a great way to kind of get to know people, right, and just to make them feel a little bit more relaxed, because they don't need to talk or do anything. You're doing most of the heavy work in this particular case. But the good thing about stories is that you can easily prepare them in advance. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a story today. I'll tell you guys a simple story. Now, this didn't happen to me. This happened to a friend of mine. But I'm going to show you anyway. And we can talk a little bit about what features make an effective story. Right. So let's say I'm at a party or something like that. I'm speaking to strangers and I want to share a story with someone. I might just start off with something nice and simple. I'll start with a hook sentence to make it sound interesting. So I might say something like, oh, you know what? I got a funny story, actually. Do you want to hear it? And then everyone will be like, yeah, of course. So I'll say so, and then the story goes something like this. Well, this happened to me quite a few years ago now. It was just after I finished university, right? And me and a couple of friends, we decided to celebrate. So we went on a little bit of a vacation, and we flew over to Xi'an, and we booked a hotel there. We were staying for about a week, you know, just kind of doing a little bit of sightseeing, mostly drinking, right? Just celebrating the fact that we graduated. And one night, we were at the pub at the hotel, having a few beers, when suddenly I saw this beautiful girl sitting just across from us at the next table. And after a while, I saw her looking up at me, and she seemed to be very interested. She stood up, and she walked by my table and just secretly slipped me a little piece of paper. All right? And then she walked out of the pub. None of my friends saw this happening, so it's our little secret. I opened the piece of paper, and it just says, "Meet me here at 9 o'clock." So at the time, I was very young, and I was really excited. I was thinking, oh my God, what's happening? Right? Is she interested in me? She must be interested in me, right? Because otherwise, why would she give me the note? So at about 9 o'clock, I said to my friends, all right, you guys got to go. All right, go back up to the room and wait. I need to meet somebody. And at exactly 9, she actually comes down, and we start having a conversation, right? And you know what? It was going fantastic, right? She was funny. She was smart. She's just an amazing person. And I thought we were going great. I was thinking, oh my God, what's happening? Are we going to get romantic? Is she going to be my future wife? I was really excited. And before you know it, I had too much to drink, and I just passed out. I blacked out right there at the pub, right? Fell asleep, and I can't remember anything that happened after that. The next morning, I woke up, and the girl was gone. It was already like 9 o'clock in the morning. The whole pub was completely empty, and I had a huge headache from the night before. And I was thinking, oh, how am I going to find her again? Maybe if I come down again at night, maybe I'll see her again. Maybe she's staying at the same hotel. So I start going up. I was thinking, let's go back to the room and have another sleep. When suddenly the bartender stopped me, and he was like, hey man, you haven't paid for all the drinks last night yet. Right? And he gives me the bill. And the bill was about $10,000. It was a crazy huge bill. And I was thinking, oh my God, how could we possibly have drunk that much? Where did the girl go? There was all these questions going around my head. And so I quickly called my friends, and I'm like, hey guys, you got to help me out, right? I can't pay for the drinks from last night. They came down and asked what happened, and I told them the story, and they were so mad at me. They were like, oh my God, you got fooled. Of course she was working for the hotel. She's just trying to get you to drink a lot, right? And in the end, they had to help me pay off the bill. Right? We spent up all of our savings. You know, we're just uni students. We didn't have much money at the time. Spent all our savings, and then we spent the rest of the holiday sitting there in the hotel room, not being able to do anything or afford anything. Cool. And that's the end of the story. Right? Now, that's always a bit of a fun story to tell. But what I want to talk about is the takeaway here. What makes it a good story? What makes it kind of easy to fit into any situation, right? Number one, you want a story that's kind of nice and engaging and funny, right? Nothing too dark or serious and stuff like that. The easiest type of joke or humor to play is when you're criticizing yourself, right? Jokes are sometimes a little bit risky, but if you're just making fun of yourself, no one minds at all. Right. Secondly, right, always talk about your feelings. Okay, so if you think about that story, not really very much happened, right? A good story is not about how many details you can give. It's not about how exciting something is. It's about the way that you tell it. In this story, nothing really happened, right? Basically, I met a girl, got drunk, passed out, and that was it. But you make it interesting, you spice it up, right, by adding all these extra little emotive things. Talk about your feelings, like, oh, I was so excited, or I think I was in love, or something like that, right? Saying things like that is really great, because number one, right, the person you're talking to, everybody knows about emotions. So if you say, I was feeling really excited, or I was like thinking maybe she's going to be my future wife, if I say things like that, you know exactly what I mean, and it's very easy for you to relate to it, right? You might also think it's quite funny. Number two, because generally speaking, right, how people feel is the most interesting part of any story. Think about any romantic movie or drama you've ever watched. Nothing really happens in those stories other than a big bunch of feelings coming out, right? So if you just talk about that, right, it's very, very easy to actually discuss. Another way for you to, you know, make easy sentences that's easy to say, right, other than I feel this or I was thinking that, right, you can also say I said this and then she said that and then I said this and then she said that. Those are really, really simple sentence structures that can still be very, very engaging in a conversation, right? So I can say things like, okay, so I was like, hi, how are you? And then she said to me, hi, my name is Yvonne. And then I said, oh, right, Yvonne, so what are you doing here, right? Why are you staying at this hotel? Where are you from? Right? I can just literally repeat a conversation that I had with somebody else, and people generally find that very engaging and interesting. That's called dialogue, right? So these are all very easy ways to basically get your mouth moving, right, and not have to worry so much about the language. The general principle here is that if you want to talk to people, right, the most important thing is to set up a kind of situation where you're feeling comfortable and they're feeling comfortable. Talk about things that you can talk about very easily. Your own experiences and stuff like that is usually the best place for you to begin, right? And talk about things that, you know, in general are a little bit more emotional, right? Because that gives them the opportunity to kind of feel like they know you a little bit better. And generally, if you tell something like that, they're more willing to reciprocate and tell a similar kind of story. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah? Hopefully it does. So I guess in the end, right, there's heaps of different things that we can talk about in terms of conversations. But like I said, the most important thing is for you to be the one who starts the conversation, right? Start by asking questions, start by getting to know the other person, right? Find out more details about them in general. It doesn't matter if you're asking a girl out or if you're just having a random chat with a stranger, right, who's on the train or on the bus, right, or who's part of a teamwork exercise that you're doing at work or something like that, right? Just remember, they're just a normal person. It doesn't matter if they're from Australia or from England or from a different country to you, right? People around the world are all mostly the same. As long as you seem like a friendly guy, people will generally be fairly willing to talk to you, right? And after that, it's just a bit of a give and take, right? So either you ask questions and you take information from them, or you go to one of your prepared topics and then you offer information to other people and see whether or not they're willing to respond to you. Yeah. So I guess those are the main ideas that I wanted to share today. Now, of course, whenever we talk about things like that, there's so many other techniques that you can discuss. But the most important thing is that you want to get out there and you want to start talking to people as quickly as possible, right? Especially if English is your second language, especially if you want to learn to communicate better, the best thing you can do is literally just to talk to people, right? And you're going to pick up a lot of new techniques on the way. So as long as you're confident, as long as you show people that you're willing and interested to discuss things with them, right, nobody is going to really think that hard about the things you say. Nobody's going to really be judging you on how well you speak or anything like that, right? It's more about presentation, right? People judge you based on how well you present yourself, not on how good your language is. So it's always very, very useful to remember that. Okay, so that was pretty much all that I wanted to discuss today, right? Just a kind of nice quick talk about some basic conversation techniques. Now, if you want to, of course, improve your skill level, you need to take every opportunity you can to actually get people into a conversation, right? If you're stepping into a taxi or an Uber next time, right, try talking to the driver. If you're going to like a coffee shop, like a local coffee shop or something like that, and they're not too busy, there's no queue, try to talk to the cashier and have a bit of a chat with them. There's no real rules for when you can start a conversation, right? When you're, you know, meeting your lawyer or something like that, or your accountant, find opportunities to ask more questions about whatever it is you can. If you've got a teacher or a tutor at university, right, see whether or not you can get into a conversation with them. These are easy conversations. If you're talking to a teacher, for example, right, you can easily start a conversation with the question, so how do you think I'm performing, right? Do you think my English has improved? Or something like that. That's a very, very easy way to begin a conversation. You already know what their job is. You already know what kinds of things they're interested in, so you can just directly ask about them, right? And then you can move from that to complete strangers as well. Yeah. All right, so that's it for today. Now, of course, if you enjoy these little talks, we're going to be doing more of these here at Velocity English. Every week, we're going to give a random talk about something to do with lifestyle or to do with English language learning. So I'm going to be doing more of these lectures and seminars just about random areas of English which you might be interested in. Nothing too academic, nothing to do with any specific test. They're mostly just going to be about everyday usable English. So if that's the kind of thing that you guys are interested in, please remember to add us onto your friends list. Please subscribe to all of our channels and stuff like that. And yeah, just keep track of all the activities that we've got going. I might get William here to talk a bit more about that. He's a much better expert at that than I am.
Okay. All right. 我看到了 ，OK。大家问了很多问题啊，然后我们来看一下，我们来统一的回答一下。其实威廉老师的中文讲的也很好，可是他老师不好意思啊，下次我让威廉老师直接中文帮你们讲吧，好吧？我靠，大家都是我操牛牛牛，纯英文太厉害了啊！然后欢迎新人报道啊，关注礼物啊，说其实我觉得下次我们可能就是中英文会混搭一下，然后我们会讲一点更加好玩的东西。我们每个礼拜基本上都有直播的。对，下次可能会我和威廉会一直来，或者我和威廉两个人一起来讲这个 topic， 也许会更加好玩一点。好吧，大家，我把我们的微信摆在这个里边，然后我们现在打出来。对，大家要的话可以记录一下，就是威廉赵321，对，我的微信号，对，我的王子的微信号。然后我们会把今天讲的内容，大家无论是听英文还是学内容，讲到这上面就可以了。好吧，然后大家有什么问题的话，现在也可以在 Type 里面我都看得见，大家可以随时来问我们。对，然后我们会把今天的东西录好以后，然后拿到我微信号的人，我会单独的发给你们。另外的话，关于任何 conversation 的东西也是一样的。我和威廉每天就是拿到的这种问题实在太多了，因为我们本身也是有在上课的，所以我们会把所有的东西在直播间里一次性回答大家。对，大家可以关注一下。这么有钱，这平台是免费的，应该谁都可以用吧？我靠，我刚看了很郁闷，你知道吧？刚刚看了那个打游戏的都有40几万人看，我也不知道为什么打游戏这么。这个平台我刚用了，大家有什么好建议可以建议一下？因为我们用的以前都是外国的网站，因为现在要中国的网站，这个好像还不错的。对，懂我意思吧？社交英语讲座啊。以后别讲什么讲座太吓人了，直接就是 cash talking 或者是 chats English chats 会比较有意思，在轻松中看看东西也可以学点东西比较好。讲座太古板了，你懂我意思吗？我威老今天还做了一个 PPT， 哎呀，实在太认真了，我都不做 PPT 的，我直接就聊就是了。到时候大家可以看过我的那个直播的感觉的话，好吧，那先这样了。那么以后我们下个礼拜再聊了。就这样，拜拜。哎，大家我好了，我要关掉吗？好吧，无所谓的，这个我根本就无所谓的，就是出点问题。